Welcome, curious minds, to the Sleepy Scientist. If you found your way here, chances are you're looking to relax, drift off, or simply let your mind wander through some quiet wonder. You're in the right place. Tonight we're going to explore the world's strangest life forms, creatures, plants, and microscopic oddities that push the very definition of what life can be. From sea cucumbers that breathe through their backsides to plants that come back from the dead, nature has a wonderfully weird imagination, and we're going to explore it slowly, gently, and one strange organism at a time. Now, I must offer a small warning. I sincerely hope this video doesn't keep you awake from sheer fascination. But if it does, at least you'll have something impressively strange to tell your friends about at breakfast. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Drop your city and your local time in the comments if you feel like sharing. It's always such a joy to see people from around the world winding down together. If this kind of gentle, curious science helps you relax, I'd be ever so grateful if you tapped the like button and maybe even subscribed. It helps this little channel reach more sleepy explorers like you, and it means a lot. Now then, lights dimmed, blankets pulled up, brain in that cozy pre-dream state. Good. Let's wander through the strange side of life together. And just before we begin, a quick reminder. Nothing in this video is medical advice, nor should it be taken as such. We're here to relax and learn, not to diagnose or treat anything. If life were a game, extremophiles would be playing on hard mode, with their eyes closed, underwater, and probably on fire. These are the organisms that laugh in the face of boiling acid, that consider nuclear radiation a light breeze, and who call salt-saturated lakes and deep-sea vents home. While humans panic when their phone gets a little damp, these life forms are thriving in conditions we once thought completely uninhabitable. Let's start with a classic crowd favourite, the tardigrade, also known by its delightful nickname, the water bear. Picture a chubby, microscopic caterpillar crossed with a gummy bear, and you're halfway there. Tardigrades are tiny, usually less than a millimetre long, and yet they are among the most indestructible creatures ever discovered. They've been boiled, frozen, zapped with radiation, dehydrated for years, and even sent into the vacuum of space, and they just keep going. How do they do it? Tardigrades have a remarkable ability to enter a state called cryptobiosis, essentially a kind of suspended animation. They curl up, dry out, and shut down nearly all biological processes. In this state, they can survive radiation, extreme temperatures, and a total lack of water or oxygen. Then, when conditions improve, they rehydrate and spring back to life, as if nothing happened. It's like being able to survive the apocalypse by taking a really good nap. But tardigrades are just the beginning. Extremophils come in many shapes and survival styles. Take thermophils, for example. These heat-loving microbes don't just tolerate high temperatures, they need them to function. Some species thrive in water that's well over 90 degrees Celsius, like the bubbling hot springs of Yellowstone National Park. Their proteins and cellular structures are specifically adapted not to fall apart at temperatures that would cook an egg or sterilize your kitchen. What's particularly fascinating is that enzymes from these heat-loving organisms are now used in biotechnology. One such enzyme, called Taq polymerase, comes from a thermophil called Thermus aquaticus. It plays a critical role in PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, a method used to amplify DNA. Without thermophiles, modern genetics would be a lot slower and messier. Now, let's talk about halophiles, organisms that adore salt. Not just a pinch here and there, but salt concentrations so high they would dehydrate and kill most life forms. Halophiles are often found in salt flats, hypersaline lakes, and even in salt mines. They've turned survival in extreme salinity into an art form. Rather than fighting the salt, they embrace it. Their cellular machinery is finely tuned to function in salty environments, using specialized proteins and pumps to balance water flow and ion levels. Interestingly, some halophiles produce vibrant pigments that give salt ponds their brilliant pink or red hues. It's not just for looks. These pigments protect the cells from intense sunlight and UV radiation. So in a way, these tiny microbes are painting the landscape with survival in mind. Then there are acidophiles, which thrive in extremely acidic environments. Think pH levels as low as 0. That's comparable to the acidity of battery acid. These organisms often live in places like sulfuric hot springs or acid mine drainage sites. Their cell membranes and internal processes are adapted to maintain stability even when surrounded by a corrosive chemical soup. Equally impressive are alkaliphils, who survive on the other end of the spectrum. They flourish in highly basic or alkaline environments, such as soda lakes with pH levels near 11. These microbes flip the script, thriving where hydrogen ions are scarce, and most proteins would fall apart from the lack of acidity. One of the most incredible things about extremophils is how they've reshaped our understanding of where life can exist. For centuries, we believed life needed a Goldilocks zone, moderate temperatures, neutral pH, liquid water. But extremophiles have revealed that life is far more versatile and creative than we imagined. Their resilience has big implications for science. Astrobiologists study extremophils to speculate on what life might look like beyond Earth. If bacteria can survive in Antarctica's subglacial lakes or inside rocks in the dry Atacama Desert, then maybe something could live on Mars or the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Extremophiles offer a quiet but powerful reminder that life is not fragile, it's endlessly inventive, and it's not just about surviving either. Many extremophiles don't simply endure their harsh environments, they thrive. Their metabolisms are adapted not just to cope, but to flourish under pressure, heat, cold, radiation, and chemical extremes. Some even perform unique chemistry, using sulfur, iron, or hydrogen gas as fuel, in place of the more traditional oxygen and sugars. Perhaps most humbling of all is that many of these organisms are ancient. Extremophiles are thought to resemble some of the earliest forms of life on Earth. When our planet was young and chaotic with no breathable air and plenty of volcanic activity, it may have looked more like a science fiction movie than the blue and green planet we know today. Yet even then, life was already getting comfortable in the chaos. So the next time you find yourself complaining about the weather or struggling to get through a hot shower, just remember there are microbes out there lounging in boiling acid and enjoying every moment of it. They are a testament to life's stubborn refusal to give up no matter how harsh the conditions. Imagine being so committed to self-defense that you willingly break your own bones to grow weapons. That's the life of the hairy frog, scientifically known as Trichobatrachus robustus, an amphibian that sounds like it wandered out of a comic book. Found in the dense rainforest of Central Africa, this frog isn't just strange, it's downright theatrical in its survival strategies. Let's start with the most dramatic bit. When threatened, the male hairy frog can snap the bones in its toes to produce sharp claws that pierce through its skin. Yes, you heard that correctly. This is not some keratin claw like you'd see in a cat or a badger. These are literal bones being broken on purpose and shoved outward to form a kind of bony spike, like Wolverine if he were a tiny amphibian. The process isn't fully understood, but researchers believe a small piece of bone is disconnected from the rest of the toe and pushed out through the skin by muscle contraction. This creates a short, sharp point that can be used to slash at predators or rivals. It's not exactly a long-term defense strategy. It's costly, damaging, and likely painful. But when you're small and squishy, desperate times call for creative anatomy. Even more curiously, these frogs don't have a sheath or retraction mechanism like a cat's claws. Once the bone is pushed out, it just sort of stays there until the tissues regenerate and the wound heals. That alone would be enough to earn a spot in the pantheon of strange survival stories, but the hairy frog isn't done yet. As its name suggests, the male hairy frog also grows hair, or something close to it. During the breeding season, he develops fine hair-like structures along the sides of his body and thighs, but these aren't hairs in the mammalian sense. They're actually dermal papillae, long, thin projections of skin and blood vessels that increase surface area for oxygen absorption. This is especially useful since males spend long periods in the water guarding their eggs. Think of it as nature's scuba gear. By growing these bizarre filaments, the male can extract more oxygen directly from the water, allowing him to stay submerged longer without needing to come up for air. It's a strange and rather elegant adaptation for an amphibian playing the role of bodyguard and babysitter. And what a babysitter he is. Male hairy frogs are fiercely territorial and protective of their chosen egg-laying sites. They've been observed aggressively defending these areas, which makes the bone claws all the more practical. You could almost say he's the kind of dad who brings a weapon to a frog fight. These behaviors are part of what make the hairy frog such an evolutionary oddball. Most amphibians are more passive, relying on camouflage or poison for defense. But the hairy frog's approach is physical, dramatic, and a bit self-sacrificial. There's something undeniably gladiatorial about snapping your own skeleton to fend off intruders. Beyond its survival quirks, this species also tells us something fascinating about evolutionary trade-offs. A creature doesn't need to be perfect, just good enough to survive and reproduce. The hairy frog's claws may not be efficient in the long run, and its hairy skin might not win any beauty contests. But both traits help it navigate the brutal realities of rainforest life. In the grand theatre of evolution, weirdness often equals effectiveness. Despite its eccentricities, the hairy frog remains poorly studied. Its secretive lifestyle and remote habitat mean there's still much to learn. Scientists aren't sure exactly how often the bone claws are used, whether they regenerate fully after injury, or how the skin heals around the broken toe bones. There are even theories that this adaptation might have evolved independently in multiple frog species, but the hairy frog is by far the most extreme example we've found so far. It's also worth noting that the frog's environment likely plays a key role in shaping such strange behaviors. Dense vegetation, aquatic breeding sites, and a host of predators and rivals create an evolutionary pressure cooker. In that kind of setting, even the most bizarre adaptations can find their niche. When camouflage or escape isn't enough, and vocal warnings fall on deaf ears, a sharp bone spike delivered by a determined amphibian might be the next best thing. As strange as it may seem, the hairy frog fits into a larger story about the lengths to which life will go to adapt. Whether it's growing extra structures to breathe or weaponizing its own skeleton, this little creature demonstrates that evolution doesn't always follow the rules we expect. Sometimes it takes a detour through the downright bizarre. And honestly, isn't that a little bit wonderful? A frog that grows fake hair and wields its own bones like daggers might sound like a bedtime monster story, but it's very real. And like many of nature's oddest inventions, it works. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but well enough to keep the species going in a world full of predators and competitors. If anything, the hairy frog is a quiet reminder that evolution doesn't prioritize comfort or elegance. It prioritizes survival, whatever the cost. And sometimes, that means breaking a few bones along the way. The deep sea is like Earth's final frontier, a place so alien and inaccessible that it often feels more like science fiction than marine biology. No sunlight ever reaches its cold, pitch-black depths. The pressure is crushing, the temperatures hover just above freezing, and the food supply is more like a slow trickle than a buffet. And yet, in this hostile environment, life thrives in some of the weirdest forms imaginable. Let's begin with one of the deep sea's most infamous residents, the anglerfish. This creature has earned its place in the spotlight thanks to its unsettling appearance and a reproductive strategy that's equal parts fascinating and mildly horrifying. The classic image is of the female anglerfish, a nightmarish fish with a massive mouth full of needle-sharp teeth and a glowing lure protruding from her forehead. That glowing tip is a piece of modified dorsal spine called the elysium, ending in a bulb known as the esker. Inside the esker, colonies of bioluminescent bacteria generate light, like a fishing rod with a built-in lantern. That light isn't just for show. In the dark emptiness of the deep ocean, it's a potent weapon. Small fish and invertebrates, curious about the flickering glow, swim closer until it's too late. The anglerfish's jaws are huge and hinged, capable of snapping shut with incredible speed. Its stomach is stretchy enough to accommodate prey nearly as large as itself. It's not just ambush predation, it's opportunistic grocery shopping in a place where meals are rare and precious. Now here's where it gets even stranger. In many anglerfish species, the males are tiny, sometimes just a fraction of the female's size, and their entire adult life revolves around finding a female and fusing with her. Literally. When a male finds a female, he bites into her body, releasing enzymes that dissolve his own mouth and the surrounding tissue, fusing his face to her skin and connecting his bloodstream to hers. Over time, he becomes little more than a pair of gonads hanging off her side, ready to provide sperm whenever she's ready to spawn. Romantic? Maybe not. Effective? Definitely. Moving through the gloom, we come to another standout, the gulper eel. Also known as the pelican eel, this deep-sea dweller looks like it was designed by a bored cartoonist with a fondness for exaggerated proportions. Its head and jaws make up nearly a third of its body length, and its gaping mouth can balloon wide enough to engulf prey much larger than itself. It looks perpetually surprised, like it just remembered it left the stove on. Despite its terrifying appearance, the gulper eel isn't much of a threat to humans. It uses its absurdly large mouth like a net, sweeping up shrimp, squid, and other small sea creatures. What it lacks in speed or agility, it makes up for in its ability to gulp down large meals in one go, a helpful trait in a world where food can be few and far between. The gulper eel also comes equipped with a whip-like tail tipped with a bioluminescent organ, which may function as a lure or distraction. Some researchers believe it can use the glowing tip to draw in curious prey while staying relatively motionless. It's not entirely unlike a glowing fishing line, though in this case the fish is the line. And then there's the blobfish. Poor blobfish. Once voted the world's ugliest animal in a tongue-in-cheek poll, it's often misunderstood. Images of the blobfish looking like a melted wax sculpture are usually taken out of context. In its natural habitat, about 800 to 1,000 meters below the surface, the blobfish looks fairly unremarkable, maybe even a little charming, in a squishy, stoic way. What makes the blobfish look so, well, blobby at the surface is the lack of structural support in its body. It has very little muscle, and its gelatinous flesh is slightly less dense than water, which allows it to float just above the seafloor without wasting energy. It doesn't need to swim actively or chase prey. It just drifts near the bottom and eats whatever edible bits come its way. When you live in a place where conserving energy is everything, being a passive eater isn't laziness, it's efficiency. This minimalist approach is actually pretty common among deep-sea animals. Muscles, speed, and intelligence are expensive in biological terms. They require energy and resources. But down in the abyss, where food can take days or weeks to appear, it's more advantageous to be slow, soft, and subtle. It's a quiet life, but it works. Many deep-sea creatures also have oversized eyes to pick up the faintest glimmers of bioluminescent light. Others, like the anglerfish, don't bother with vision at all and rely on other senses to detect movement and pressure changes in the water. Some species are completely eyeless, having evolved in perpetual darkness where sight offers no advantage. Then there's the matter of pressure. At those depths, the weight of the water above can be hundreds of times greater than at the surface. For most animals, that kind of pressure would crush bones and collapse air-filled organs. But deep-sea creatures avoid this problem by not having air pockets to begin with. They lack swim bladders, and many have soft, compressible bodies that resist damage. It's a good reminder that sometimes the best way to survive is to be a bit squishy. There's also an incredible range of coloration in the deep ocean, even in the absence of sunlight. Some fish are jet black, absorbing nearly all light to become nearly invisible. Others are red, which is clever because red wavelengths don't penetrate far underwater, meaning red creatures often appear pitch black in the deep sea. Still others use counter-illumination, producing light on their undersides to blend in with the faint light from above, effectively erasing their shadows. Nature loves a good visual trick. The deep sea is a realm of extremes, extreme darkness, pressure, and scarcity, and its residents have met the challenge with wild, inventive adaptations. Big jaws, glowing lures, fused lovers, ballooning mouths, and gooey bodies might sound absurd, but in the context of deep-sea survival, they're remarkably well-tuned. It's easy to think of these creatures as grotesque or bizarre, but they're also elegant solutions to difficult problems. In a place where light never shines and resources are few, Every quirk is a survival tool. Each weird shape and glowing organ is a quiet success story, a testament to life's ability to adapt not just in spite of adversity, but because of it. And in that quiet, cold, and crushing world far beneath the waves, that kind of creativity is what keeps life going. Beneath the crushing silence of the deep sea, in the still waters far below where sunlight fades to nothing, grows one of the most delicate structures in the natural world. It looks more like a work of art than a living creature, a lacy, glassy tower that seems too fragile for the cold and pressure of the ocean floor. But this isn't sculpture, it's a sponge. And not just any sponge, but the Venus's flower basket, a type of glass sponge with a skeleton made entirely of silica. Yes, the same material found in glass. The scientific name is Euplectella aspergillum, and it's one of nature's finest examples of elegance born from stillness. This sponge doesn't swim, crawl, or chase prey. It simply anchors itself to the seafloor and lets the ocean do the work. Its body is built like a tube, a cylinder lined with intricate glass spicules that create a mesh-like lattice. The sponge uses this lattice to filter particles of food from the water, mostly tiny plankton and organic detritus drifting by. Its skeleton isn't just beautiful, it's an engineering marvel. The glassy lattice is both strong and flexible, able to withstand the intense pressure of the deep ocean without cracking. Engineers and material scientists have studied its structure closely, noting that it distributes stress in ways that prevent fractures. In fact, the design of the glass sponge has inspired research into more durable architecture and even next-generation building materials. Not bad for something that doesn't have a brain. What's most surprising is how this structure manages to be so strong despite being made from what is, essentially, underwater glass. Most glass is brittle and easily shattered, but the sponge's version is reinforced by layered construction. The spicules, tiny needle-like rods of silica, are bundled together in crisscross patterns, forming a type of natural fiber composite. The result is a lightweight, pressure-resistant skeleton that has more in common with modern fiberglass than it does with window panes. And here's where things get even more impressive. Those same silica spicules can transmit light. In other words, they work a bit like natural fiber optic cables. When light, say from bioluminescent plankton or other glowing creatures, hits the sponge's surface, some of it travels through the spicules, bouncing along their length just like light in a man-made fiber optic line. Researchers have found that the sponge's spicules can carry light farther and with less signal loss than some commercial optical fibers. Nature, once again, has beat us to the punch. There are a few ideas as to why the sponge might need this natural lighting system. One theory is that the light could help attract symbiotic creatures, including small shrimp or other organisms that take shelter inside the sponge's hollow body. Another idea is that it might aid in reproductive signaling or communication, although much of this remains speculative. In the deep sea, sometimes a gentle glow can make all the difference when trying to connect across the darkness. Speaking of shrimp, the Venus's flower basket has another strange and poetic feature. It often hosts a bonded pair of small shrimp that enter the sponge when they're young and small. As they grow, they become too large to escape through the narrow openings in the sponge's glass lattice, effectively sealing themselves inside for life. The pair lives out their days in their elegant glass home, feeding on whatever the sponge filters in. In some cultures, particularly in parts of Japan, dried specimens of these sponges are given as wedding gifts, a symbol of enduring love and lifelong commitment. It's a little romantic, a little claustrophobic, and very, very deep sea. Despite its stationary nature, the glass sponge plays a surprisingly important role in its ecosystem. By filtering vast quantities of water, it helps clean and circulate nutrients throughout the deep sea. It also provides habitat and shelter for countless small organisms, acting as a sort of undersea apartment complex. The sponge doesn't need to move or hunt. It simply builds, waits, and thrives. Some species of glass sponges can live for incredibly long periods. Estimates suggest lifespans of several centuries, with certain individuals believed to be over 10,000 years old. That would make them among the longest living animals on Earth. They sit in silent patience, growing slowly in the cold dark, cycling water and supporting life around them like quiet sentinels of the deep. Their slow pace and delicate build also make them vulnerable. Changes in ocean chemistry, sedimentation, and damage from deep-sea trawling can destroy them in an instant. Unlike fish or crustaceans, they can't swim away or regenerate quickly. Once broken, their intricate glass structures don't repair easily. In recent years, marine scientists have highlighted the importance of protecting sponge grounds, dense areas of glass sponge habitat that act as biodiversity hotspots in the deep ocean. There's something almost meditative about the existence of the glass sponge. It does everything quietly, growing, filtering, glowing, all without fanfare. It doesn't chase, compete, or roar. And yet it has managed to inspire scientists, engineers, poets, and newlyweds alike. In a world that often celebrates speed and aggression, the glass sponge reminds us that beauty can come from stillness, and strength can come from structure rather than muscle. It's proof that even in the coldest, darkest corners of the planet, life finds ways to be not just functional, but extraordinary. The deep sea may seem harsh and inhospitable, but for the glass sponge, it's the perfect place to build a glittering tower and live a life of quiet brilliance. And for us, it's a chance to appreciate that sometimes the weirdest life forms are also the most graceful. If you ever feel like you're having a dramatic day, just remember the sea cucumber, a creature that escapes danger by vomiting out its own internal organs, not metaphorically, literally. It launches its guts like a biological confetti cannon, leaving predators confused and hopefully too grossed out to continue the attack. Then, over the following weeks, the sea cucumber simply regrows whatever it just jettisoned. Crisis managed, organs replaced, back to business. Sea cucumbers are members of the echinoderm family, making them distant relatives of sea stars and sea urchins. They're squishy, slow-moving animals that look more like sausages than anything remotely threatening, which makes their defensive strategy even more surprising. Most species live on the seafloor, from shallow coral reefs to the deepest trenches of the ocean, sifting through sand or catching particles drifting by. Now let's talk about that dramatic escape mechanism. When threatened by a predator, say a fish, crab, or sea star, the sea cucumber can contract its body muscles with surprising force and eject its internal organs through either its mouth or its rear end. The ejected parts often include sections of the respiratory tree, intestines, and in some species, long sticky threads called Cuvierian tubules. These threads can entangle or distract a predator long enough for the sea cucumber to slowly make its exit. It's like pulling a fire alarm in your own stomach and then sneaking away while everyone's too busy panicking. As gross as this sounds, it's incredibly effective. Many predators are taken aback by this sudden, messy defense. The ejected organs sometimes contain toxic compounds, making them not only confusing but also unpleasant to eat. And because the sea cucumber doesn't rely on fast movement or aggressive attacks, this strategy offers a valuable window of escape in the slow-motion world of benthic sea life. But the real magic is what happens afterward. The sea cucumber doesn't just shuffle off into a gutless existence. Over the course of several days or weeks, it regenerates all of the lost organs. This regenerative ability is so advanced that scientists have studied it as a model for human tissue repair. Imagine being able to lose part of your digestive system and then calmly regrow it, like replacing a worn-out appliance in your kitchen. The process of regeneration is carefully regulated. The remaining tissues shift and multiply, new cells differentiate, and the lost organs are rebuilt with precision. Some species can regrow complex structures like respiratory trees and digestive tracts, with seemingly no scarring or long-term damage. It's not just resilience, it's a complete biological reboot. Speaking of respiratory trees, here's another strange detail. Sea cucumbers breathe through their behinds. That's not a figure of speech. They use a pair of internal structures called respiratory trees, which are connected to the cloaca, a common exit cavity for waste. Water is drawn in through the cloaca, passed over the respiratory trees for gas exchange, and then expelled. In many species, tiny muscle contractions help pump water in and out. It's rear-end respiration and it works surprisingly well. Some species take this a step further by hosting symbiotic organisms inside their cloacal chambers. Pearlfish, for instance, have been found living inside sea cucumbers, literally swimming into the respiratory opening and using the internal space as shelter. It's one of those biological arrangements that makes you wonder whether the sea cucumber ever gets to relax. Parasites, roommates, predators. It's a lot for one gelatinous body to manage. Despite their soft and slow nature, sea cucumbers are vital to ocean ecosystems. They play a crucial role in recycling nutrients on the seafloor. As they feed, they ingest sand and detritus, digest the organic material, and excrete clean sediment. This helps maintain the health of the benthic environment and supports other marine life. In many tropical ecosystems, a significant portion of the sand you feel between your toes has passed through a sea cucumber first. Suddenly that beach walk takes on a new texture. Their feeding behavior is equally unhurried and strange. Sea cucumbers have tentacle-like tube feet around their mouths, which they use to scoop up sediment or plankton. These tentacles are covered in mucus, and after collecting food, the cucumber pulls each one into its mouth and licks it clean. It's a slow, rhythmic process, like a conveyor belt made of spaghetti. Not all sea cucumbers look alike. While most are soft and elongated, some species have colourful spikes or armoured skin. A few can inflate themselves like balloons to deter predators, while others burrow into sand or wedge themselves into coral crevices. The diversity is broader than their reputation suggests, and many are downright beautiful, with vibrant reds, purples, or translucent bodies decorated in delicate patterns. In recent years, sea cucumbers have become increasingly important to humans too. In many Asian cultures, they are considered a delicacy and are harvested both from the wild and through aquaculture. They're prized not just for their texture and taste, but also for their purported medicinal properties. Extracts from sea cucumbers are being investigated for their potential anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer compounds, though much of the evidence remains preliminary. This demand has led to overharvesting in some regions, which is a concern given the ecological importance of these animals. Because they reproduce slowly and are sensitive to changes in their environment, sea cucumbers can be easily disrupted by human activity. Protecting them isn't just about preserving weirdness, it's about maintaining the health of marine ecosystems. And yet, for all their ecological and medicinal importance, sea cucumbers remain one of the most underappreciated groups in the animal kingdom. They're soft, slow, and often overlooked, until you learn that they're essentially ejectable, regenerating, sand-filtering, butt-breathing wonders. Their entire biology feels like a challenge to our expectations of what life should be. Who says you need to run from danger when you can just throw your own stomach at the problem? Who says lungs need to be in the chest when they work just fine near the exit? And who says an animal has to be fast, fierce, or flashy to matter? Sea cucumbers are the quiet custodians of the ocean floor, doing vital work without much recognition. They embody a kind of evolutionary weirdness that's both practical and mesmerizing. Whether recycling sand, regenerating guts, or serving as a reluctant Airbnb for pearlfish, they keep the ocean ticking along in their own squishy way. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it works. And in the world of biology, that's often the highest form of praise. In the warm, murky waters of Southeast Asia, there lives a creature with the body of an octopus and the talent of a stage actor. Meet the mimic octopus, a soft-bodied shapeshifter that doesn't just blend into its environment, it becomes other animals entirely. With just a little flair and some well-practiced limb choreography, this clever cephalopod can impersonate venomous sea snakes, spiny lionfish, flatfish, and perhaps even more, all without needing so much as a costume change. Discovered only in the late 1990s off the coast of Indonesia, the mimic octopus, Thormoctopus mimicus, is relatively new to science, but its talents are anything but novice. Most octopuses are masters of camouflage. They can change the color, texture, and pattern of their skin in an instant, using specialized cells called chromatophores. These cells expand and contract like tiny paint balloons under the skin, allowing octopuses to match coral, sand, or even the shifting light of their surroundings. The mimic octopus takes this a step further. It doesn't just hide, it performs. When threatened or trying to sneak past a predator, the mimic octopus adopts the appearance and movement of more dangerous creatures. One of its most impressive tricks is impersonating the banded sea snake. By tucking 6 of its arms into a burrow and stretching the other 2 out in opposite directions, it creates the illusion of a long, slender body striped with black and white. Since sea snakes are venomous and not often messed with, this impersonation can be a very convincing reason for potential threats to back off. It can also transform into a lionfish, spreading its arms wide and rippling them like the spiny fins of this famously poisonous predator. The motion, combined with the contrasting stripes on its limbs, makes for a strikingly accurate performance. Another go-to disguise is the flounder, a flatfish that hugs the ocean floor. The mimic octopus flattens itself and glides along the sand with all arms trailing behind, imitating the flounder's swimming style and shape. The remarkable thing is that these impressions are not random. Observations suggest that the mimic octopus may choose its disguise based on the type of predator nearby. For example, if it's approached by damselfish, which are known to mob sea snakes, the octopus might avoid the snake routine and try something else. This implies a level of decision-making that goes beyond instinct, a sign of behavioral flexibility and problem-solving. Octopuses already have a reputation for intelligence. They're excellent escape artists, have been known to open jars, use tools, and even play. Some studies show that they can recognize individual humans, solve mazes, and remember past experiences. With their decentralized nervous systems, most of their neurons are not in their brains but in their arms. They process information in a way that's fundamentally different from vertebrates. It's less like centralized thinking and more like a network of independent problem solvers working in coordination. In the case of the mimic octopus, this intelligence expresses itself through creative deception. It's one thing to blend into a background, it's another to convincingly impersonate an entirely different species. This kind of mimicry requires a complex understanding of not only appearance but also behavior. The mimic octopus doesn't just look like a lionfish, it moves like one. It doesn't just resemble a sea snake, it sways and flicks like one too. What's even more impressive is that all of this happens with no bones, no vocal cords, and no formal training. The octopus's body is essentially a bag of muscle and nerves, entirely boneless and endlessly flexible. Its skin can ripple, smooth out, spike, or wrinkle, depending on what it's trying to emulate. Add a dozen color changes, and you've got a creature that can disappear into coral or transform into an entirely new threat at will. Why go to all this trouble? In the unpredictable theater of the shallow sea, survival is all about being one step ahead, or at least one disguise ahead. The mimic octopus lives in a habitat full of predators and competition, including cuttlefish, eels, and aggressive fish. Unlike some of its cousins, it doesn't rely on venom, ink, or brute force. Instead, it uses deception as its main form of defense and cleverness as its best offense. This mimicry might also help the octopus in other areas of its life, including hunting. While it's best known for its defensive impersonations, some scientists speculate that mimicry could help it sneak up on unsuspecting prey. If a small crustacean doesn't recognize the octopus as a threat, or mistakes it for a more familiar animal, it might not flee in time. There's still much to learn about the full range of behaviors this species can display. The mimic octopus also stands out because it seems to have evolved a whole tool set of impersonations rather than just one. In the animal kingdom, mimicry is usually specialized. A butterfly might look like a toxic species and stick to that one disguise. A harmless snake might evolve to resemble a venomous cousin. But the mimic octopus has a whole repertoire. That kind of flexible mimicry is extremely rare and suggests a surprisingly nimble mind behind those clever arms. Of course, some of what we know about the mimic octopus is still based on observation and inference. These animals are elusive and live in environments that are tricky to study for long periods. There's a real chance we haven't seen the full extent of what they can do. Some divers have reported them mimicking jellyfish or even crabs, though not all of these behaviors have been formally documented. With creatures this mysterious, the line between fact and underwater legend can get blurry. Even without the folklore, though, the mimic octopus is a remarkable example of how evolution can shape intelligence and adaptability in unexpected ways. It shows that brains don't have to be big and strategies don't have to be aggressive. Sometimes the best way to survive is to pretend to be something else entirely. It also challenges the way we think about personality in animals. Octopuses are not just reactive blobs. They explore, they test, they change. The mimic octopus, in particular, seems to have found a niche where creativity is not just helpful, it's essential. And in a world where being noticed often means being eaten, learning to be someone, or something, else is more than just a neat trick. It's a masterclass in the art of staying alive. If evolution had a costume designer, the leafy sea dragon would probably be its masterpiece. Floating gently along the southern coast of Australia, this creature looks less like an animal and more like a drifting piece of kelp brought to life. With its delicate leaf-like appendages trailing behind it, the leafy sea dragon is a living illusion, perfectly adapted to blend in with the swaying seaweed and seagrass that surround it. At first glance, it doesn't even look real. With a long pipe-like snout, small, transparent fins, and a body draped in decorative fronds, the leafy sea dragon seems more like a floating art installation than a fish. But beneath the frilly camouflage is a member of the seahorse family, a close relative of both seahorses and pipefish, though far more flamboyant in design. Despite all the leafy projections, the sea dragon's fronds aren't used for movement. They serve only to deceive, making it nearly impossible to spot when it's drifting near the ocean floor. Actual propulsion comes from nearly invisible fins along the sides of its head and back. These fins ripple with such subtlety that they're often hard to detect, even when you're staring straight at the animal. Combined with a slow bobbing motion and an uncanny ability to mimic the rhythm of the water, the sea dragon pulls off its disguise with almost theatrical perfection. In fact, it's so good at going unnoticed that it doesn't even need speed. Most predators don't realize it's there to begin with. Camouflage like this is a form of passive defense. Rather than flee or fight, the leafy sea dragon avoids trouble by disappearing in plain sight. This strategy works well in its native habitat, cool, sheltered coastal waters rich in seaweed and algae. Here, blending in isn't just helpful, it's essential. The ocean can be an unforgiving place, and looking like a snack is a fast ticket to extinction. Interestingly, it's the males who carry the eggs. Female sea dragons deposit their eggs onto a special patch on the underside of the male's tail, where they are fertilized and cared for until they hatch. The male protects and oxygenates the developing eggs for several weeks, carrying them around like a scaly marsupial. When the babies are ready, they hatch fully formed and drift off into the kelp forest to start their own invisible lives. On the other side of the evolutionary spectrum, we find creatures that seem determined to leave the water behind altogether, like the mud skipper, a fish that appears to have missed the memo about needing to stay submerged. Mud skippers are amphibious fish that inhabit the muddy shores of tidal flats and mangroves throughout parts of Africa and Asia. While they still breathe through gills, they've also developed a variety of tricks to survive and even thrive on land. One of their more entertaining features is their ability to walk. Using their muscular pectoral fins, mud skippers scoot, wriggle, and sometimes even leap across muddy surfaces. It's not quite a graceful stroll, but it gets the job done. They use their fins to pull themselves forward in a series of awkward hops, looking like half-determined, half-confused sausages on a mission. What's especially fascinating is how they breathe out of water. Mud skippers have evolved the ability to absorb oxygen through their skin and the lining of their mouth and throat, a bit like how amphibians breathe. But for this to work, their skin needs to stay moist, which is why they're usually found lounging in damp mud or taking frequent dips in shallow pools. They also store bubbles of air in their gill chambers, allowing them to keep their gills wet and functioning even when they're fully out of the water. This amphibious lifestyle gives mud skippers access to a whole buffet of food that other fish can't reach. Think insects, small crabs, and detritus scattered across the mud. It also lets them avoid aquatic predators by simply leaving the water. If a big fish is chasing you and you can just climb out of the ocean, you've already won. Their behavior gets even more theatrical during mating season. Male mud skippers construct elaborate mud towers, yes, actual towers, to impress females. They perform little dances and head bobs around these structures, and if the female is impressed, she might join the male in his muddy bachelor pad. It's essentially real estate-driven courtship, with a flair for drama. Both the leafy sea dragon and the mud skipper represent fascinating endpoints on the evolutionary spectrum. One hides so well it's barely seen at all, vanishing into the background like a living whisper. The other boldly straddles the boundary between sea and land, lurching across the mud flats with a confident grin and a pocket full of air. These adaptations didn't appear overnight. They're the result of countless generations fine-tuning survival in very specific environments. In the case of the sea dragon, the focus is on invisibility, elegance, and parental investment. For the mud skipper, it's all about versatility, resourcefulness, and making the most of two very different worlds. Camouflage and transitional adaptations like these highlight one of nature's core strategies. Work with what you've got and change what you need to. Whether it's dressing like seaweed or developing a makeshift set of lungs, evolution doesn't play favorites, it just plays the long game. And while these animals might seem like oddities, they're actually doing something many species attempt in less dramatic ways. They're negotiating the boundaries of their environment, pushing the edges of what a fish can do and what it can become. The sea dragon turns stillness into invisibility. The mud skipper turns the shore into opportunity. Both are creative, curious reminders that life is far more flexible than we often give it credit for. It's easy to think of evolution as a march toward complexity or superiority, but sometimes it's about mastering a niche, even a narrow one. Whether by disappearing completely or redefining what it means to be a fish, these animals have found success by stepping sideways, literally in the case of the mud skipper, and embracing the peculiar. And in doing so, they remind us that survival doesn't always look heroic or fast or fierce. Sometimes it's leafy and slow. Sometimes it's muddy and awkward, but it works. And in the quiet corners of tide pools and kelp forests, it works beautifully. Plants are often seen as passive, peaceful beings, quietly photosynthesizing in the sun, rooted in place, minding their own business. But not all plants play nice. Some are more like botanical vampires, latching onto others, draining their lifeblood, and even manipulating their behavior. Enter the world of parasitic plants, where deception is a survival strategy, and the leaves are not always what they seem. One of the most fascinating and unsettling examples is the dodder vine. At first glance, it looks like a harmless tangle of orange or yellow threads, sprawled across other plants like a bowl of spaghetti gone rogue. But don't be fooled. Dodder is a parasite. It doesn't have chlorophyll, which means it can't photosynthesize on its own. Instead, it wraps itself around host plants, drills into their tissues with specialized structures called haustoria, and siphons off nutrients and water. This feeding method is surprisingly sophisticated. Once dodder finds a host, it establishes multiple connections, essentially plugging itself into the host's vascular system. It's not just stealing food, it's hijacking the plant's internal highways. Over time, dodder can completely overwhelm its host, stunting its growth, draining its resources, and sometimes killing it outright. But perhaps the most eerie part of dodder's life cycle is how it chooses its victims. When a dodder seed germinates, it doesn't immediately put down roots. Instead, the young seedling waves around in a kind of slow-motion search, detecting chemical cues in the air. Studies have shown that dodder can sniff out potential hosts by sensing the volatile organic compounds they release. It's not unlike a bloodhound following a scent trail, except this bloodhound is a plant and it's hunting for dinner. Once it identifies a suitable target, dodder grows toward it with surprising precision. If it finds a host within a few days, it latches on and begins feeding. If not, it simply withers and dies. There's no backup plan, it's all or nothing. That level of risk makes its success rate all the more impressive. And dodder doesn't stop at mere parasitism, it also eavesdrops. Research has shown that once attached, dodder can transfer genetic material and signaling molecules between itself and its host, and even between two different host plants. It acts as a kind of botanical middleman, forming a bridge that allows communication to occur across species. Some scientists refer to it as a plant internet, albeit one operated by a highly manipulative service provider. There are even cases where Dodder appears to alter the gene expression of its host, tweaking its metabolism and chemical defenses. This kind of control veers into zombie territory, where the host is alive, but not entirely in charge of its own body. It's not the stuff of horror movies exactly, but it's pretty spooky when you realize it's all happening in a garden bed somewhere. Dodder isn't the only plant playing dirty. There's an entire botanical underworld of parasitism, each species with its own peculiar tactics. Take the broom rape, for instance. It's a root parasite that attaches underground and never bothers to grow leaves or stems. It lives entirely off the energy and nutrients of other plants, often causing significant damage to crops in the process. Its flowers pop up briefly above the soil like sinister little flags marking a successful invasion. Or consider the mistletoe. Yes, the same plant that graces winter doorways and inspires awkward holiday kisses. It's actually a semi-parasite. While it can photosynthesize a bit, it also taps into the branches of trees to steal water and nutrients. Over time, heavy mistletoe infestations can weaken or even kill their hosts. It's charming in a festive bouquet, but up in the treetops it's a slow-motion squatter with a leafy disguise. What makes parasitic plants so intriguing is how active they are, despite lacking brains or nervous systems. They sense, respond, and adapt in ways that feel surprisingly strategic. Some even mimic their hosts. In parts of Africa, a parasitic plant called Hydnora africana grows underground and resembles the roots of the plants it feeds on. When it flowers, it produces a foul odor to attract pollinators, usually dung beetles and carrion flies, who are lured in by the scent and trapped briefly inside the flower before being released, covered in pollen. It's deception layered on deception. In other cases, parasites mimic the shape or color of the host's leaves, making them harder to detect by animals or even by human gardeners. These visual tricks aren't about fooling the host. They're about avoiding detection by anything that might try to intervene. For a plant with no mobility, the best defense is often a really good disguise. Despite their dark reputation, parasitic plants play an important role in ecosystems. They can help control dominant plant species, making room for diversity. Their tangled networks often become homes for insects and birds, and in some indigenous traditions they hold medicinal or symbolic value, used in everything from folk remedies to spiritual rituals. Scientifically, they're gold mines. Studying how parasitic plants detect and interact with hosts could lead to new insights in agriculture and biotechnology. For example, understanding how Dodder smells its prey might inspire new ways to protect crops or control weeds, and the mechanisms they use to transfer genes or signals between species could have fascinating implications for genetic engineering and plant communication. Still, there's something undeniably eerie about them. Perhaps it's because they blur the line between plant and predator, or maybe it's the way they seem to sense the world, without eyes, ears, or movement, yet still somehow aware. It challenges our assumptions about what plants are capable of. They're not just passive, sun-worshipping greens. Some of them are out there making decisions, launching chemical attacks, and rewriting the rules of who's in charge. In the quiet world of plants, where changes happen slowly and battles are often invisible, parasitic species like Dodder and broomrape remind us that even the most seemingly tranquil landscapes can harbor complex, competitive dramas. There are no roaring predators or flashing claws here, just tendrils, chemical trails, and a silent, persistent hunger. And maybe that's the most surprising thing of all. Life doesn't need movement or menace to be powerful. Sometimes it just needs a vine with good aim and a taste for control. Nature can be subtle, elegant, even poetic, but occasionally it tosses all that out the window and goes for pure spectacle. Exhibit A, a flower that smells like rotting meat and can reach the height of a grown human. Exhibit B, a fruit that explodes with such force it flings its seeds at speeds comparable to a professional fastball. These are not your average daisies. Let's begin with the olfactory offender, the corpse flower. Officially known as Amorphophallus titanum, This botanical behemoth is native to the rainforests of Sumatra and holds the impressive title of being one of the largest and smelliest flowers in the world. It can grow over 10 feet tall and only blooms once every few years, making it a rare and slightly dramatic event. But the size isn't what gets it all the attention, it's the smell. When the corpse flower blooms, it releases a powerful odor that's often compared to rotting flesh, spoiled fish, or an abandoned dumpster on a summer day. Not exactly floral. The stench is so strong it can be detected from dozens of feet away and has been known to clear out greenhouses and botanic gardens faster than a fire drill. Why such a gruesome perfume? It's all part of the plan. The corpse flower relies on carrion-loving insects, like flesh flies and beetles, to pollinate it. These insects are drawn to the scent of decaying animals, thinking they've found a delightful place to lay their eggs. Instead, they land on a giant meat-scented bloom and unknowingly pick up or deposit pollen as they fumble around in confusion. The flower doesn't just smell like meat, it behaves like it too. During the first day of bloom, the flower heats itself up to roughly human body temperature. This warming process helps volatilize the scent compounds and also enhances the deception by mimicking the warmth of a real carcass. It's like a botanical version of a haunted house, full of special effects designed to trick and trap. Despite its terrifying aroma, the corpse flower is completely harmless. It doesn't eat anything or trap the insects it attracts. It just needs a little help with reproduction. And this particular strategy, however unpleasant to us, happens to work extremely well in its natural habitat, where pollinators are drawn more by smell than by colourful petals or sweet nectar. Now swing the spotlight to a very different kind of drama, the exploding cucumber. Known scientifically as Ecbalium elaterium, this small, unassuming plant from the Mediterranean region doesn't look like much at first glance, but it's hiding a secret worthy of a cartoon chase scene. When its fruit ripens, it builds up internal pressure from fluid accumulation. At a certain point, the tension becomes too great, and the fruit detaches from its stalk with a sudden burst, flinging seeds in all directions at speeds up to 60 miles per hour. That's right. This plant launches its children across the landscape with explosive force. The explosion is triggered by a buildup of mucilaginous sap, which creates hydraulic pressure inside the fruit. When the structural integrity of the cucumber fails, usually because of a tiny touch or natural weakening, the whole thing goes off like a botanical water balloon with a mission. The seeds are ejected through the tip of the fruit, which acts like a nozzle, shooting them into the air in a spectacular burst. The whole process is over in less than half a second, but the seeds can travel more than 20 feet. It's the ultimate in passive-aggressive parenting. Out you go and don't come back. Why go to such dramatic lengths? Like many seed dispersal strategies, it's all about giving the next generation a good start. By flinging seeds far from the parent plant, the exploding cucumber reduces competition for resources like sunlight, water, and nutrients. It also helps colonize new territory. While other plants rely on wind, water, or animals to carry their seeds, this one decided to build its own launch system. And it's not the only plant to have discovered the power of explosive dispersal. Other species like touch-me-nots, impatiens, use tension in their seed pods to achieve a similar effect, albeit on a slightly less dramatic scale. But the exploding cucumber remains one of the most forceful and entertaining examples of nature's air delivery service. What's especially interesting is that these two plants, the corpse flower and the exploding cucumber, couldn't be more different in their approach, yet both have found wildly unconventional ways to solve the same problem: reproduction. One draws pollinators with stench and spectacle, the other flings its seeds with hydraulic precision. Neither has a brain, a nervous system, or a marketing department, but both have evolved strategies that are, in their own way, brilliantly effective. In the case of the corpse flower, it's about seduction by deception. It tricks insects into doing its bidding by imitating the smell and warmth of decaying meat. In the world of pollination, subtlety isn't always an asset. Sometimes you have to make a scene, and when you only bloom once every several years, you need to make sure you get it right. The exploding cucumber, by contrast, isn't interested in luring anyone. It waits in silence, ripens in secrecy, and then unleashes its seeds with a botanical equivalent of a sneeze. No pollinators required, just pressure, timing, and a surprisingly effective mechanism of force. Both plants serve as a reminder that nature is endlessly inventive when it comes to reproduction. Flowers don't have to be delicate. Fruits don't have to be still. And not everything in the plant kingdom is about calm breezes and gentle petals. Some of it is loud, smelly, and downright shocking. It's easy to overlook plants when thinking about strange or extreme adaptations, but they often win the prize for creative problem solving. They may be rooted in place, but their strategies for survival are anything but static. From corpse-scented blooms to cucumber grenades, the plant world is full of surprises waiting quietly under leaves and vines, until, suddenly, they're not so quiet anymore. In the harshest corners of the earth, where rain is a rare luxury and the sun feels more like a punishment than a gift, some plants have decided to play dead. Not metaphorically, actually dead-looking. Brown, shriveled, brittle little tumbleweeds that could easily be mistaken for forgotten yard waste. But give them a single drop of water, and they'll slowly begin to unfurl, green up, and, astonishingly, come back to life. These are resurrection plants, botanical escape artists that cheat death in ways most organisms can only dream of. The term resurrection plant refers to a group of desiccation-tolerant species, meaning they can survive the complete loss of almost all internal water. Most living cells are not built for this. Water is essential for cellular structure, biochemical reactions, and the general keeping things alive business. Take away the water, and cells usually collapse, membranes rupture, and proteins unfold like laundry left in the rain. But resurrection plants have found a way to avoid all that. One of the most famous examples is Selaginella lepidophylla, often called the false rose of Jericho, or simply the resurrection fern. Native to arid regions like the Chihuahuan Desert, this plant can survive losing over 95% of its water content. In dry conditions, it curls up into a tight brown ball, protecting its most sensitive tissues from sunlight and damage. It looks completely lifeless, something you'd sweep off a sidewalk. But appearances are deceiving. When water returns, the transformation begins. Slowly, over the course of hours or days, the ball uncurls, the leaves unfurl, and green begins to spread across its surface like a time-lapse of spring. Metabolism restarts. Photosynthesis resumes. It's not quite instant, but it's unmistakably alive again. No CPR required, just hydration. This remarkable trick isn't limited to a single plant. Other species, like Craterostigma plantagineum in Africa and Hebelia rhodopensis in the Balkans, exhibit similar behavior. Even some mosses and ferns can survive extended periods of desiccation. Each species has evolved its own biochemical toolkit to survive the long, dry wait. At the cellular level, the survival strategy is astonishingly clever. Resurrection plants produce large quantities of sugars like trehalose and sucrose, which act like molecular packing peanuts. These sugars stabilize proteins and membranes during the dehydration process, preventing the catastrophic collapse that usually comes with drying out. It's as if they wrap their cells in bubble wrap before the water vanishes. They also produce a class of proteins known as LEA proteins, short for late embryogenesis abundant. These molecules are usually found in seeds and help protect against drying. In resurrection plants, LEA proteins show up all over the place, not just in seeds. Their job is to maintain order when everything else wants to fall apart. Even the plant's DNA gets special treatment. Desiccation can cause genetic material to break or mutate, but resurrection plants have evolved robust DNA repair systems to fix damage once rehydration begins. Imagine pressing pause on a disaster movie and then somehow cleaning up all the chaos before hitting play again. That's essentially what these plants are doing. One of the most dramatic things about resurrection plants is how quiet their lives can be. In their dormant state, they barely exist metabolically. They don't grow, they don't reproduce, they just wait. Days, months, sometimes even years, waiting for rain, waiting for a miracle, and when it comes, they act like nothing ever happened. In nature, this is a powerful survival advantage. In desert environments, where rainfall is unpredictable and often arrives in sudden bursts, the ability to rapidly switch from dormancy to growth is invaluable. While other plants may wither and die in drought, resurrection plants simply go offline, preserving their structure and genetic material in a dry, dormant state until conditions improve. Humans have long been fascinated by this ability. In some cultures, resurrection plants are kept as symbols of renewal and hope, passed down through generations as living heirlooms. Their ability to come back to life makes them feel magical, even though their secrets are entirely biochemical. Scientists, unsurprisingly, are paying close attention. If we can understand how resurrection plants manage to preserve their cells during extreme dehydration, we might apply that knowledge to all sorts of fields. Imagine drought-resistant crops that don't just tolerate dryness, but actually survive full desiccation. Or pharmaceuticals that remain stable without refrigeration. Or even better preservation techniques for food and biological samples. The challenge is that resurrection behavior is extremely complex. It's not one switch being flipped. It's hundreds of genes working in coordination, fine-tuning responses across every cell. Studying them means tracking these processes as they happen in real time, which requires precise tools and patient researchers. But the potential payoff is significant. There's also a quiet poetry to these plants. They embody a kind of resilience that doesn't require constant motion or effort. They thrive not by fighting the environment, but by yielding to it completely. Let the dryness come. Let the winds blow. Let everything shut down. And when the moment is right, start again. Of course, it's not without limits. Resurrection plants can't survive being burned, crushed, or frozen solid. They're not immortal, and their revival depends entirely on receiving water at the right time. But within their niche, deserts, rocky slopes, cliff faces, they are superbly equipped to endure. Even their physical structure is shaped by survival. Many are compact and low to the ground, minimizing exposure to wind and sun. Their leaves often have specialized coatings to reduce water loss, and their roots, while shallow, are quick to absorb any moisture that hits the soil. Efficiency, not abundance, is the name of the game. In a world increasingly shaped by drought and climate instability, there's something deeply reassuring about a life form that has mastered the art of waiting. Resurrection plants are a quiet reminder that survival isn't always about speed or strength. Sometimes it's about adaptability, about knowing when to pause, conserve, and trust that the rain will eventually fall. They don't bloom every year. They don't shoot skyward or tower above their neighbors. But when they do revive, it's a small miracle, an ancient rhythm playing out in the silence of the desert. A curled-up ball of potential, turning green once more. And for a brief moment in a landscape that so often seems lifeless, there is movement again. There is color. There is life. All from a plant that was, by all appearances, dead. But just like a good nap, it was only ever temporary. If you ask someone to picture intelligence, they'd probably imagine a brain, neurons firing, synapses connecting, a grey wrinkled organ full of thoughts and ideas. But what if you could solve puzzles, plan efficient routes, and share information without a single brain cell? Meet the slime mold, an organism that challenges almost everything we think we know about intelligence. Slime molds aren't plants, they aren't fungi, and they aren't animals either. They belong to a strange group of organisms called protists, a kind of catch-all category for things that don't quite fit anywhere else. The most famous among them is Physarum polycephalum, a bright yellow slime mold that looks a bit like someone spilled mustard on the forest floor. But don't let its appearance fool you. This creature is full of surprises. Despite having no nervous system, no brain, and no real sense of self in the way we typically understand it, slime molds are capable of surprisingly sophisticated behaviors. One of the most well-known examples comes from an experiment where researchers placed oat flakes, slime mold's favorite food, at the ends of a maze. The slime mold, starting at one point of the maze, explored the corridors by stretching out its body like a creeping network of gooey tubes. Over time, It retracted the parts that led to dead ends and reinforced the paths that led to the food. Eventually, it formed a streamlined, efficient connection between the food sources, essentially solving the maze. What makes this so fascinating is that there's no central command system, no brain issuing orders. The slime mold's movement is driven by chemical signals and feedback loops, small changes in its internal and external environment that guide it toward more favorable conditions. In other words, it uses a kind of distributed intelligence. The whole organism works together to make decisions, not through thought, but through chemistry, and it gets weirder. In another experiment, scientists placed oat flakes in a pattern that mimicked the layout of Tokyo and its surrounding cities. The slime mold grew out across the map, forming connections between food sources that closely resembled the actual layout of the Tokyo rail system. Not only was it efficient, but it also responded to simulated obstacles like light or salt, adjusting its paths accordingly. Engineers have studied this behavior to explore better designs for transportation and communication networks. Turns out this brainless blob has a pretty good sense of urban planning. Slime molds can also remember, in a very non-human sort of way. If exposed to a chemical repellent at regular intervals, they will eventually slow their movement just before the expected exposure, even if the repellent is no longer present. It's as if they've learned the rhythm and are anticipating discomfort. They're not forming memories like we do, but they are recording and responding to patterns in time, using changes in their internal chemistry. Even more surprisingly, slime molds can share information. If two slime molds encounter each other, and one has already explored an area with food or danger, the other can pick up on those signals and adjust its behavior. This kind of decentralized communication is not just useful, it's efficient. A slime mold can act as one superorganism or split into multiple parts, depending on its environment, and when times get tough, it can transform. When food becomes scarce or conditions get too dry, slime molds can enter a dormant state, forming spore-producing structures that help them survive until better days return. There's a kind of elegance in how they move, slow, rhythmic pulsing as they extend tendrils in all directions, probing for resources. These movements are driven by internal waves of cytoplasm flowing back and forth, like a tiny biological tide pushing information around the organism. As they explore, they leave behind slime trails. Yes, actual slime, which help them track where they've already been and avoid redundant paths. Watching a slime mold work is oddly mesmerizing. There's no rush, no frenzy. It's methodical, deliberate, and patient. And yet, the outcomes can be remarkably intelligent. It's a reminder that problem-solving doesn't have to look like thinking. Sometimes it's just about making small adjustments, sensing changes, and responding over time. In many ways, slime molds force us to rethink what intelligence really means. We often define it through human-centric traits, language, memory, emotion, reasoning. But slime molds show that you don't need thoughts to make decisions. You don't need a brain to solve problems. Intelligence can emerge from the simplest parts, working together in just the right way. This kind of non-neural intelligence is increasingly interesting to scientists, especially those in fields like robotics and artificial intelligence. By studying how slime molds operate, researchers are developing decentralized algorithms that mimic their behavior. These models could help design systems that work without a central controller. Think swarms of robots, self-organizing traffic systems, or adaptive building layouts. And then there's the philosophical angle. If a brainless single-celled blob can remember, learn, and solve problems, what does that say about the nature of thought? Are we overcomplicating it? Or are slime molds just a very peculiar exception to the rule? Either way, they offer a kind of quiet wisdom. They don't rush, they don't panic, they simply adapt, reorganize, and try a different route. And often, they find the shortest path to the goal. Not bad for something that can't even see where it's going. There's something peaceful about that. In a world that often values speed and noise, slime molds succeed by being slow, deliberate, and aware without ever being conscious. They remind us that intelligence doesn't always need to look like a lightning bolt. Sometimes, it looks like a gentle ripple across the forest floor, a yellow thread winding its way forward, one pulse at a time. So the next time you hear the word slime and think of something messy or mindless, remember there's a species out there quietly solving mazes, sharing resources, and redesigning cities, all without so much as a neuron, just slime and time. In the humid understory of tropical rainforests where ants march in endless lines and fungi sprout from every crevice, nature has cooked up something that feels less like biology and more like a horror story. It's a tale of parasites and puppetry, of tiny bodies hijacked and turned into unwilling chauffeurs for a fungus with a very specific and very gruesome plan. Meet Ophiocordyceps, the infamous zombie ant fungus. This fungus doesn't just infect ants, it takes over their behavior, directing their movements like a microscopic puppeteer until the ant ends its days clinging to a leaf in just the right position for the fungus to complete its life cycle. It's as if the parasite writes a script, hands it to the ant, and watches as the insect carries out its final, doomed performance. It starts with a spore. Ophiocordyceps spores drift through the air or cling to leaves until they make contact with an unsuspecting ant, typically one of the carpenter ant species that forage along the forest floor and low vegetation. The spore attaches to the ant's exoskeleton and begins to germinate, using enzymes to break through the tough outer layer and infiltrate the body. Once inside, the fungus doesn't immediately take control. Instead, it begins to grow quietly, spreading through the ant's body and absorbing nutrients. It avoids damaging critical systems too early. After all, it still needs the host alive and mobile. Over the course of several days, the fungus advances, eventually reaching the ant's brain and central nervous system. But here's where things get eerie. Rather than simply destroying the brain, the fungus somehow manipulates it. The exact mechanism is still a topic of research, but scientists believe the fungus releases compounds that interfere with the ant's neurological signaling. In effect, it rewrites the ant's instincts. The ant stops following trails, abandons its colony, and begins to climb, an unusual behavior for a species that normally stays low to the ground. This climbing is no accident. The fungus guides the ant to a location with just the right temperature, humidity, and exposure, usually the underside of a leaf or a branch, about 10 inches above the ground. Once there, the ant performs one final macabre act. It bites down on a leaf vein with a death grip so tight that its jaws often stay locked even after death. This death grip ensures the ant remains in place, no matter what happens next. And what happens next is classic body horror. The ant dies. The fungus kills it from the inside, replacing muscle tissue with fungal filaments. Then, after a short delay, a fruiting body begins to sprout from the back of the ant's head. This slender stalk will eventually release new spores into the environment, ideally falling onto the forest floor where other ants might pass by and begin the cycle again. Timing is everything in this process. The fungus needs the ant to die in the perfect spot, high enough for spore dispersal, but sheltered enough for the delicate fungal structures to grow. Too early or too late, and the whole operation fails. The precision with which Ophiocordyceps manipulates its host is both chilling and impressive. There are dozens of known Ophiocordyceps species, each one adapted to a specific host. Some target different ant species, others go after beetles or spiders. Each version has its own strategy, fine-tuned to the biology of its host. In fact, what we used to think of as a single zombie ant fungus has turned out to be a whole complex of closely related fungi, each playing its own parasitic game. What's particularly fascinating is that the fungus doesn't grow into the brain itself. Studies using advanced imaging have shown that it surrounds and invades muscle tissues and forms networks around the brain, but leaves the brain structure relatively untouched. It's more like remote control than direct invasion. The ant isn't being consumed mindlessly, it's being steered. Even after the ant is dead, the fungus is still vulnerable. Other microbes or fungi can invade and spoil its careful setup, which is why Ophiocordyceps also produces antifungal compounds to defend its growing stalk. Some ants, sensing the danger, will actively avoid infected individuals. Others may carry them away from the colony to reduce the risk of infection. It's a miniature arms race, with behavior, chemistry, and timing all in play. The phenomenon has captured the imagination of everyone from scientists to storytellers. The concept of mind-controlling parasites isn't just limited to fungi. There are parasites in the natural world that manipulate the behavior of fish, rodents, and even birds. But Ophiocordyceps stand out because of how visible and theatrical it is. Watching an ant climb to its doom and seeing a fungal stalk burst from its head is undeniably cinematic. In recent years, the story of zombie ants has made its way into pop culture, from documentaries to video games. But while the visuals are dramatic, the real story lies in how complex and fine-tuned parasitism can be. This isn't random destruction. It's targeted, timed, and astonishingly well adapted. It shows just how far evolution will go to give a species an edge. And yet, the fungus's success depends on balance. If it kills too many ants too quickly, it risks destroying its own host population. If it doesn't manipulate the ant effectively, it misses the window for spore dispersal. Every step must be just right. Despite all we've learned, many questions remain. How exactly does the fungus identify the right species to infect? How does it coordinate the host's climbing and biting behavior with such precision? What chemical signals are involved? Researchers are still unraveling the genetic and biochemical web behind the phenomenon, and each new discovery seems to deepen the mystery. It's easy to view the zombie ant fungus as sinister, but in the broader context of nature, it's simply another example of a survival strategy. Parasitism is everywhere, from tapeworms to viruses to barnacles living inside crabs. What makes Ophiocordyceps special is its mix of biology and behavior, where the lines between mind and body, host and invader, become blurred. If nothing else, it reminds us that intelligence and control don't always reside in brains. Sometimes they lurk in spores and filaments, working silently in the shadows. And in the damp, mossy corners of the forest where ants march and fungi bloom, that's more than enough. If nature had a list of animals that didn't quite follow the rules, the green sea slug would be somewhere near the top. This isn't just a sea slug that happens to be green. This is an animal that performs photosynthesis, the same process plants use to convert sunlight into energy. In other words, it eats sunlight. And it manages this botanical feat by borrowing parts of algae and, even more impressively, integrating them into its own body. The result is one of the strangest mashups in the animal kingdom. Part slug, part plant, and entirely weird. The creature in question is Alesia chlorotica, a small, bright green sea slug found along the eastern coast of North America, from Nova Scotia down to Florida. It doesn't look particularly threatening. It's more leaf-shaped than slug-shaped, with a flattened, wide body that helps it absorb as much sunlight as possible. It spends much of its time in shallow waters, lounging on algae-covered surfaces, basking under the sun like a tiny solar panel with a slow crawl setting. Here's how it works. Alesia chlorotica feeds on a specific type of algae called Vaucheria litorea, but it doesn't just digest it in the usual way. Instead, it performs a kind of biological pickpocketing. As it sucks the contents out of the algal cells, it steals the chloroplasts, the tiny structures responsible for photosynthesis, and stores them in its own cells, mostly within the tissues lining its body. This process is called kleptoplasty, and it's as shady and fascinating as it sounds. The chloroplasts remain functional for weeks or even months inside the slug. During that time, they continue to capture sunlight and produce energy, providing the slug with a kind of backup power system. It's not enough to sustain the animal completely, it still needs to eat, but it allows the slug to go without food for extended periods, especially in environments where algae are scarce. Essentially, it becomes a self-sustaining hybrid, sunbathing its way through lean times. Now, stealing chloroplasts is impressive on its own, but this sea slug takes things a step further. There's evidence that Alesia chlorotica has actually incorporated some of the algal genes responsible for chloroplast maintenance into its own genome. This means it's not just housing foreign parts, it's producing the proteins needed to keep them running. The chloroplasts on their own can't survive indefinitely outside the algal cell, they require support. The slug appears to have solved this problem by copying and using the algae's genetic tools. This kind of horizontal gene transfer, moving genes between completely unrelated species, is rare in animals. It's common in bacteria, but in complex multicellular organisms, it's like reprogramming a car to run on parts from a toaster. It shouldn't work, but somehow in this sea slug it does. All of this blurs the already fuzzy line between plant and animal. Traditionally, we like to keep these categories neat. Plants stay rooted, soak up the sun, and produce their own food. Animals move, hunt, and rely on consuming other organisms. But Elysia chlorotica dances across that line with elegant indifference. It's not trying to be one or the other. It's simply found a niche that works, and evolution has rolled with it. It raises some compelling questions. Is the sea slug more plant or more animal? Biologically, it's still very much an animal. It moves, it mates, it has a nervous system, and it doesn't grow from a seed. But its ability to harvest sunlight places it firmly in territory we usually reserve for plants and algae. It doesn't quite belong to either kingdom, in the way we're used to defining them. It's a gentle reminder that nature doesn't care much for human categories, and while Elysia chlorotica is one of the best-known kleptoplasts, it's not the only animal to borrow a few green tricks. Other species of saccoglossan sea slugs also steal chloroplasts, though most don't maintain them for as long or as effectively. What makes Elysia special is how long the chloroplasts remain active, and how deeply integrated the process appears to be with the animal's own biology. There's also a kind of understated beauty to the whole process. Under a microscope, the sea slug's cells glow with a rich green as chloroplasts line its tissues. The effect is not just functional, it's aesthetically striking. When you look at it gliding slowly through the water, catching sunlight like a tiny leaf with ambition, it's hard not to be charmed by its ingenuity. Scientists are still unraveling the full story of how this relationship evolved. It's not entirely clear how the slug came to possess and activate the algal genes, or how its cells managed to support and protect the foreign organelles for so long. There are still debates about how permanent this gene transfer is, whether it occurs in every individual or only during certain stages of development. But even with unanswered questions, it's clear that something extraordinary is going on at the cellular level. For researchers, this odd little slug offers insights not just into evolution, but into bioengineering. If an animal can successfully harness photosynthesis, what could we learn about energy transfer, organelle compatibility, or even synthetic biology? Could similar mechanisms help in developing new methods of solar energy capture, or lead to medical breakthroughs in tissue engineering? At the very least, it forces us to expand our understanding of what's biologically possible. From a philosophical perspective, Elysia chlorotica is quietly rebellious. It's not flashy or fast or fearsome. It doesn't dominate its environment or sit atop a food chain, but it defies expectations. It survives by bending the rules, mixing kingdoms, and rewriting the script on what it means to be an animal. There's something refreshingly humble about its method. No claws, no venom, no speed. Just a patient partnership with algae, a good sunbathing spot, and the kind of adaptation that feels more like wizardry than science. And yet it's all real. Nature, as always, delivers strange truths that outshine our most imaginative fiction. So next time you're out in the sunshine, think of the green sea slug. Somewhere in a tidal marsh, a tiny creature is soaking up rays, not just for warmth, but for energy. It's gliding leaf-like through the shallows, part animal, part plant, quietly demonstrating that the boundary between the two was never as clear as we thought. Imagine walking through a quiet forest at night and seeing soft green glows pulsing from logs and leaf litter, or swimming through dark ocean water as shimmering blue clouds erupt all around you, lit by your every movement. These gentle lights aren't reflections or tricks of the eye. They're coming from the living world itself. It's called bioluminescence, and it's one of nature's most enchanting phenomena. Bioluminescence is the ability of living organisms to produce light through chemical reactions. It's found in an astonishing range of creatures, from glowing jellyfish and deep-sea fish to fireflies, fungi, and even a few crusty old marine worms. What links them all is luciferin, a light-emitting molecule. When luciferin reacts with oxygen in the presence of an enzyme called luciferase, it releases energy in the form of visible light. It's chemistry with a flair for the dramatic. But what's truly magical is how diverse the uses of this glow are. Some creatures flash to find mates, others light up to scare away predators. A few use it to lure prey straight into their mouths. Some, quite poetically, use it to disappear entirely. Let's start with a familiar glow, the firefly. On warm summer nights, you might see them blinking lazily through the air, sending out tiny messages of light. Each species of firefly has its own unique blinking pattern, like a Morse code for romance. Males fly through the night, flashing their signature rhythm. Females, waiting in the grass or perched on leaves, flash back in response if they're interested. It's a courtship that relies entirely on light, and if done well, it leads to love, or at least a date. Not all firefly encounters end in romance, though. In some particularly devious species, females mimic the flash patterns of other species to lure in unsuspecting males, only to eat them instead. It's a dangerous dating scene when your flashlight might be a dinner bell. Underwater, things get even stranger. In the ocean, bioluminescence is everywhere. Most deep-sea animals glow in some way, from delicate plankton to large predatory fish. In fact, it's estimated that over 3/4 of deep-sea organisms are bioluminescent. Down there, in the pitch-black depths, light is both rare and incredibly valuable. It can mean the difference between finding food and becoming food. Take the anglerfish, for example. It uses a glowing lure, essentially a modified fin tipped with bioluminescent bacteria, to attract prey in the darkness. Smaller fish and crustaceans swim toward the light, thinking it might be food, only to become food themselves. It's a biological bait and switch, perfected over millions of years. Some squid species use their light in more creative ways. Certain deep-sea squid can eject glowing ink, creating a dazzling distraction as they escape from predators. Others have light-producing organs on their undersides and use them for counter-illumination. By matching the faint light filtering down from the surface, they eliminate their shadow and become nearly invisible to anything looking up from below. In this case, the light isn't a signal, it's a shield. And then there are the glowworms. Not technically worms at all, these are actually the larvae of certain beetles or fungus gnats, depending on the region. In the caves of New Zealand, for instance, thousands of glowworms dangle silk threads from cave ceilings and emit a soft blue glow to lure flying insects. Drawn to the light, the insects fly into the sticky threads and become dinner. The whole cave looks like the night sky turned upside down, complete with twinkling stars that just happen to eat you. Bioluminescence isn't limited to animals either. Fungi get in on the action too. Some species of mushrooms, like Armillaria melia and Mycena chlorophyos, glow with a soft green light. This glow, often called foxfire or fairy fire, has inspired myths and stories for centuries. No one knows for certain why fungi glow, but one idea is that the light helps attract insects that can carry spores to new locations. If you're a mushroom that can't walk, hitching a ride via bioluminescent Uber makes a lot of sense. Planktonic organisms called dinoflagellates are responsible for some of the most breathtaking light shows on Earth. These tiny creatures can light up entire coastlines with electric blue waves when the water is disturbed. Each time a wave breaks or a swimmer moves through the water, the plankton flash. This can turn an ordinary night swim into something that feels like diving into the stars. Some species glow as a defense mechanism, startling predators or attracting even larger predators to scare the attacker away. It's like yelling for help in flashing neon. What makes all of this so remarkable is how independently bioluminescence has evolved. It isn't a single inherited trait. It has emerged multiple times across different branches of life. The basic components, luciferin and luciferase, differ between species, which suggests that light production is such a useful ability that evolution couldn't help but invent it again and again, each time with its own little twist. And it's not just about glowing in the dark. The way organisms control their light is equally impressive. Some can flash in bursts, others glow continuously. A few can dim or brighten their light based on mood, threat level, or environmental conditions. Certain jellyfish can even change the color of their glow, shifting between green and blue depending on where the light is viewed. It's more sophisticated than many modern lighting systems, all accomplished by tiny, decentralized cells working in harmony. Bioluminescence is not to be confused with fluorescence, which is another form of glow often seen in coral reefs and jellyfish, but it requires an external light source to activate. Bioluminescence, on the other hand, creates light from within, no batteries required. Humans, of course, have long been fascinated by glowing life. We've written poems about fireflies, told ghost stories about glowing mushrooms, and created modern light-up gadgets inspired by dinoflagellates. Scientists are even exploring ways to use bioluminescent proteins in medicine, research, and technology. Glowing genes are used as markers in DNA studies, helping researchers track where certain proteins are active. In the future, we might even see bioluminescent plants lighting up pathways or algae helping to detect pollutants. But perhaps the most magical thing about bioluminescence is that it feels so unexpected. We're used to seeing light from the sun, the moon, street lamps and screens, but glowing life, that feels like a secret kept by nature, a soft whisper in the dark reminding us that there's always more going on than meets the eye. So the next time you're near the ocean at night, or watching fireflies flicker across a summer field, take a moment to appreciate what's happening. That glow isn't just for beauty, it's communication, it's defense, it's survival, and above all, it's one of the most enchanting examples of evolution doing what it does best, turning chemistry into something unforgettable. Nature has a delightful way of confusing expectations, especially when it blurs the line between living and non-living. Some creatures look like rocks until they suddenly bleed when cut. Others appear to walk, not with legs, but by slowly shifting their roots through the soil like botanical explorers. Among these wonders are Pura chilensis and Socratia ixoriza, two life forms that challenge our basic ideas of what it means to be a plant or an animal, or even to move at all. Let's begin with the rock that bleeds. Found along the coast of Chile and Peru, Pura chilensis is a sea creature that looks, for all intents and purposes, like a barnacle-encrusted stone. You could walk right past dozens of them on a tide-washed rock and never suspect they're alive. But beneath that rugged exterior is something far stranger. A soft-bodied, filter-feeding animal that squirts water, filters plankton, and when sliced open, reveals a rich crimson interior that looks alarmingly like raw meat. Pura is a tunicate, part of a group of marine invertebrates more closely related to vertebrates than you might expect. In fact, as larvae, tunicates have a notochord, a kind of primitive spinal structure that places them in the same broad category as fish, birds, and humans. But unlike us, they don't keep that structure into adulthood. After a short free-swimming phase, the larva finds a suitable surface, sticks itself down, and transforms into its adult form. It's a bit like if a baby human turned into a couch cushion after settling into a nice corner of the living room. Once anchored, Pura spends its life sucking in seawater, filtering out tiny food particles, and minding its own very stationary business. It has two siphons, one for drawing water in and another for expelling it, and lives off the microscopic life drifting by. The outer surface is tough and stone-like, often coated in barnacles or algae, making it indistinguishable from its surroundings. But its interior is soft, red, and rich, in a compound called vanadium, which may contribute to its distinctive colour. It also has a high concentration of a rare amino acid called didemnins, some of which are being studied for their potential medical uses. In Chile, Pura is more than just a curiosity. It's actually considered a delicacy. Called pure by locals, it's harvested, sliced open, and eaten raw or cooked. People describe the taste as intensely briny, iodine-rich, and definitely an acquired flavour. Some say it tastes like the ocean multiplied by 10. Others suggest it tastes like licking the bottom of a rusty boat. Either way, it's undeniably unique. While Pura doesn't do much moving, its story is still one of unexpected complexity. A creature that looks like a stone, breathes like a fish, and bleeds like a butcher's table? It's proof that appearances can be wildly deceptive, and that nature's filing system is full of odd crossovers. Now contrast that with something that does move, albeit so slowly you'd need a time-lapse camera and a lot of patience to notice. The walking palm, Socratia ixoriza, grows in the tropical rainforests of Central and South America and has gained fame for its supposed ability to walk through the forest. This isn't walking in any animal sense. There are no feet, no striding limbs, but the tree has a strategy that certainly resembles movement over time. At the base of the walking palm is a spray of long, stilt-like roots that radiate outward and downward like a bundle of awkward stilts. These roots emerge above the ground and provide support on the often muddy or shifting soil of the rainforest floor. The idea, at least according to a long-standing and still debated theory, is that the tree can slowly shift its position by growing new roots in one direction, while allowing older roots in the opposite direction to die off. In essence, it walks toward better light or more stable ground. Some early observers claimed the tree could move as much as a few centimeters per day, which sparked the imagination of scientists and storytellers alike. Picture a forest of trees slowly shuffling their way through the jungle, adjusting themselves like sunbathers rearranging their chairs. The image is irresistibly weird. However, not all scientists are convinced. Some studies suggest that the idea of actual movement is more myth than reality, and that the root growth is more about stabilization than locomotion. Still, even if the tree isn't quite wandering the rainforest like a leafy nomad, its root system is undeniably unusual. Most trees bury their roots deep underground for anchorage. Socratea prefers its roots to stay exposed, balancing like a circus performer on stilts, which may help prevent it from toppling in soft soil or after landslides. Its strange form also makes it highly adaptable in a crowded forest environment. If a neighboring tree falls and a new patch of sunlight opens up, Socratea might have a better chance of reaching toward that light, not by walking per se, but by rebalancing its foundation in that direction. It's less of a march and more of a patient lean. The idea of a tree that moves, even slowly, challenges our image of plants as rooted, motionless beings. Much like Pura challenges our assumptions about what animals are supposed to look like. One pretends to be a rock, the other a tree with ambition. Both are quiet outliers in the kingdoms they belong to. They also remind us that movement in nature isn't always fast or flashy. Sometimes it happens in the background, quietly, persistently, just beneath our perception. A tree adjusting itself over years, an animal pretending to be stone while pulling nutrients from the sea. These are strategies shaped not by speed but by endurance. And they hint at a broader truth about life on Earth, that adaptability comes in many forms. Whether it's the stillness of Pura or the slow sway of Socratea, these organisms are solving the same basic problems all living things face: how to stay alive, how to find food, and how to make the most of their environment. It's easy to miss them, these strange and silent life forms. But once you notice them, they leave a lasting impression. A bleeding rock, a walking tree. They're like nature's riddles, sitting quietly under our noses, just waiting to be understood. We began this quiet journey with a promise to gently explore the strangest life forms on Earth, to admire their oddities, and perhaps to marvel at the unexpected ways life chooses to thrive. And now, as we reach the end, it's worth pausing for a moment to appreciate what all these strange creatures and plants truly represent. What first appears as weird or outlandish often turns out to be something much deeper: adaptation. Not the chaotic randomness of nature gone wrong, but the quiet, deliberate work of evolution shaping life to fit its surroundings, however unusual those surroundings may be. Take the sea slug that harvests solar power, or the parasitic vine that can smell its victims and rewrite their biology, or the brainless slime mold that navigates a maze like a miniature city planner. At first glance, they seem like curiosities, science fiction brought to life. But behind each one is a carefully honed strategy for survival. And isn't that, in its own way, beautiful? There's a tendency in biology, especially when we first begin to learn it, to focus on the elegant, the efficient, the typical. The sleek birds, the fast cats, the flowering trees. But the more you look, the more you realize that life's real power is in its diversity. The outliers, the edge cases, the creatures that don't fit neatly into categories. These are not accidents of nature. They're examples of just how flexible, how imaginative evolution can be. The blobfish doesn't look like a fish because it doesn't need to. At the bottom of the ocean, Without the crushing weight of pressure to hold it together, it loses its structure. It's not a mistake, it's a solution. The sea cucumber breathes through its rear end and ejects its guts in self-defense, not because it's gross, but because in its slow, soft world, that's what survival demands. The glowing fungus, the rock that bleeds, the tree that may or may not walk, they're all part of life's endless experiment with form and function. And through them, we get a clearer sense of biology, not as a static rulebook, but as a conversation. Each organism has its part to play. Each quirk, no matter how odd, is shaped by the same forces that shaped us. We share a common history even with the leaf-shaped sea dragon and the bone-clawed frog. We're all branches on the same ancient tree, bending in different directions. The strange teaches us humility. It reminds us that we are not the standard by which all life should be measured. We are simply one version, suited for our niche, like all the others. When we look at a tardigrade suspended in cryptobiosis for years, or a resurrection plant coming back to life after months of drought, we're not seeing failures of design. We're seeing success stories, just told in a different language. And the more we study these oddities, the more we learn about genetics, resilience, ecosystems, and even ourselves. Slime molds might help design better transportation networks. Bioluminescent proteins are used in medical imaging. Fungi that mind control ants raise questions about behavior and control that stretch far beyond insects. The weird is not just entertaining, it's useful. It drives science forward by revealing what's possible. But even without the usefulness, even without the practical benefits, there is value in simply knowing these things exist. In knowing that somewhere in a Chilean tide pool, a sea creature that looks like a rock is quietly filtering the ocean. That on a rainforest floor, a tree's roots are repositioning themselves bit by bit in a slow-motion waltz. That under the forest leaf litter, a brainless yellow smear is solving problems we once thought required a mind. These stories bring a kind of quiet wonder. They slow us down. They ask us to look again. And perhaps, if you're still awake, they leave you with a sense of peace, a comfort in the idea that life, messy, strange, and creative, always finds a way, even the weird way. In the introduction, I joked gently that I hoped the video wouldn't be too interesting, that you wouldn't be kept awake by glowing fungi or immortal jellyfish. But if you're still here, still listening, I'm glad. Because the strangeness we've wandered through tonight is more than curiosity. It's a celebration of possibility, a reminder that there is no one way to be alive, no standard mold to fit, just endless shapes, glowing softly in the dark. And if sleep is now tugging at your thoughts, let it come. Let these images settle gently into your mind like phosphorescent plankton in calm water. Life is bizarre, life is beautiful, and in all its weird, wandering forms, life goes on. Good night, fellow explorer. May your dreams be just a little stranger and a lot more wonderful